All right, here we go. NSCA Chapter 18. This is the third out of three presentations. This is specific to pregnant clients. And with this part of the chapter, I've had clients that I've worked with who are pregnant. I've worked with clients who, have anywhere through the process of being pregnant, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, also postpartum, meaning just after pregnancy. And I'll share a couple different stories regarding my experience, regarding my interactions with clients who are pregnant. So, when you meet people who are clients who are pregnant, they usually have been either directed by a physician to work out or they'll be kind of self guided. And usually, the self guided, those individuals are already worker outers, they're already people who participate in fitness programming, but they just want to carry on and continue their routine as much as possible throughout their pregnancy. You have some situations where the person's been guided or directed by their physician to go ahead and start an exercise program and do so with certain either modifications or very clear directives on what they're trying to accomplish. Now, I will say this. There are definite personality traits when you have people who are directed by a physician versus someone who is a worker outer who's self-guided. There is also most definitely personality differences between people who are going through their first versus their second, perhaps even third pregnancy. Totally different in terms of how those people are perceiving process. A person who might have previous involvement in fitness will have a clear personality difference than somebody who has not done fitness before when they're pregnant. And then also where they are in the process of being pregnant, what trimester. And, for some clients, as they go through their pregnancy, they just can't work out during the first trimester. They're just too sick. They have morning sickness. They can't do it. Or they kind of come in, they gut it out, and they want to do some kind of workout. And so they actually curtail their workouts a little bit. And then they can pick up the intensity during the middle trimester. But the last trimester, just because the fetus is getting so large, they have some limitations on what they can and can't do, and also some limitations regarding just how intense they can work out. But we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. The overall benefits that are listed in the book, they list numerous ones, but they talk about just broadly based things like faster return of pre-weight pregnancy, better aerobic and muscular fitness, better blood flow and circulation to both the mother as well as the fetus. And there's also greater energy reserve. So they have this rather large list that goes on and on and on and on and on. Then we'll talk about a few of these here, but some are physiological, some are psychological and emotional, and some, have their place in terms of prepping the person as they go through their pregnancy, and then they go postpartum after delivering the baby and being best prepared to get back into working out and feeling fit after delivering. The two main things that they talk about in the book regarding pregnancy issues, you have preeclampsia and gestational diabetes mellitus. And preeclampsia itself is specific to hypertension that's induced during pregnancy. And then gestational diabetes mellitus is a form of diabetes that's diagnosed during pregnancy. And to a certain degree, when you have either one of these conditions, meaning a person walks in and says, "Hi, how you doing? I'm pregnant and I'd like to train with you. I have preeclampsia." They'll know that. That's a medical diagnosis, and they'll probably have a directive from their doctor. They'll be in that population of people. And same thing with gestational diabetes mellitus. They'll also have a directive from their doctor to come into the gym and work out. And they'll probably have some very specifics on what they should and should not be doing in the gym. And to a certain degree, your role becomes risk management, where you're trying to manage a process for that person best as possible and help them adhere to an exercise program that falls in line with what their physician has basically prescribed for them. With the different changes that happen, if we kind of break this out and go bit by bit by bit, we go cardiovascular, respiratory, mechanical, metabolic, and thermoregulatory. I'll kind of blitz through these real quick and I'll let you pause and read these. But with individuals, you can use the RPE scale or the talk test to make sure we're at an appropriate exercise intensity. As a person goes through their pregnancy, that RPE will change in terms of a workload that you provide today. You might provide it 4 weeks from now, and the RPE might be much higher because of course, there's a greater tax on the system as the fetus grows and develops. So just realize that an RPE today for, doing a certain exercise protocol might be different several weeks down the road. And you have to kind of be the judge of this and have a good interaction or good communication with your client to be able to kind of navigate this process and be able to have them understand what is a hard workout, what is an RPE of 10 or 15 or 20, what that means to the person. And then also the recommendation they have here is you look for exercise intensity that's about 30 minutes, at least 5 days per week for the accumulated 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity during the week. And again, moderate activity is kind of a relative term here because it could be more difficult a couple of weeks from now. So these are the kind of things you have to navigate in terms of how they're like moving targets as you go through a pregnancy or a person goes through the pregnancy while working out. Respiratory response, pregnant women will they'll increase their minute ventilation by almost 50%, resulting in 10 to 20% more oxygen used at rest. And again, it makes sense when you think about you have another developing body inside the pregnant person's body that needs oxygen also, right? So just keep in mind that you're almost like training for two, if you will. I hate to say it like that, but you have to account for the fact that the energy demands are higher for the person who's pregnant than the non-pregnant participant. And when you have the pregnancy progress, you also have a bit of a mechanical limitation where the fetus itself develops and the uterus ends up almost like inhibiting the ability of the diaphragm to actually do what it does mechanically to have respiration work. By inhaling and exhaling, the diaphragm moves both up and down to both help us pull air in, but also push air out. And that gets inhibited when you have the pregnancy progress to the point where the uterus is large enough where it inhibits the movement. So realize you have a mechanical limitation there. They talk a little bit in here about like the morphological changes that you have in the body, but the thing I want to point out is the center of mass changes. And your clients would benefit from doing balance type work as they're going through their pregnancy. You don't have to focus on it exclusively, but it certainly helps. The other part of this too is as the person's body, body changes as they go through pregnancy, there are some things that become difficult, whether it's getting out on a floor, laying down on a bench, getting up from a bench, transitioning from one position to another. These are the things that become more challenging as a person goes through their pregnancy. So you have to view this again in kind of terms of risk management, and you have to look at this and go, okay, does the activity, and they note this in this paragraph here, does the activity present a potential for falling or perhaps some type of abdominal trauma? And that becomes a conversation where if you check that box yes, then probably need to stay away from that activity. They also do note that here, for example, personal trainers may include gentle stretching and dynamic flexibility exercises that help women achieve physical balance during pregnancy, which I do agree with, and I found that to be of benefit to my clients. They go into talking about the major muscle groups, and they also talk about Kegels. Kegels are exercises used to help strengthen the pelvic floor muscles. And the best way to think of this is like if you're urinating in the bathroom, hopefully in the bathroom, and you're urinating and you decide to pause midstream, the muscles you would use to pause midstream, that would be a Kegel type of exercise where you use the muscles in the pelvic floor to shut off that stream. So the idea is you're trying to work not only broad-based large muscle groups, but also the smaller muscle groups like Kegels, or do Kegels to help in terms of bringing recognition to how to control or at least strengthen the pelvic floor muscles. Metabolic. As we noted earlier, you have to just anticipate that as the fetus grows and develops, you're going to need, or the person's going to need more oxygen. And it's just a simple fact that you have a person and something growing inside of them that also needs oxygen. So to that end, the oxygen part is the end result of the metabolic response that you see because there's a caloric requirement as well. And as we noted, by having a fetus inside the pregnant person, you end up having to increase things like caloric intake, vitamins, And they note specific ones down here. Pregnant women should be sure to take sufficient quantities of calcium, B12, D, iron, folic acid to have a healthy outcome during the pregnancy. Now, they don't really elaborate on it here in the book, but they talk about some of the negative effects of poor nutrition. And, there's many times the case of the person who's the worker outer who continues their working out in the sense of being vain, and they're more concerned about their own vanity as opposed to the health of the fetus, and they end up actually causing a detrimental response to the development of the fetus because they don't actually increase their caloric intake, they don't truncate their workouts, and you have fetuses that are born and they end up having issues when they're born because of the decisions the mother made while going through pregnancy. Thermoregulatory. Now here's, I can provide an example here from one of my clients. She was given directives by her doctor. When you work out, I want you to work out at this heart rate level, no higher, because the logic was the heart rate level corresponded to a core body temperature for the mother. And we had to work at a certain heart rate level early on, and then we had to drop that heart rate level as we went through the pregnancy. As we went through first trimester to second trimester to third trimester, it became less and less and less, or I should say lower and lower and lower, to make sure we didn't have mom overheat too much, because she would have difficulty dissipating that heat and giving off that heat and being able to actually function and not overheat. So to that end, we were very cognizant and aware of her heart rate as it correlated to her body temperature. They talk about some exercise guidelines here. There's several up here on the screen. I'll leave these up for you to look at, but the key one you really want to focus on here for the book and things we have going on with the quiz and the test, they focus on resistance training for major muscle groups can't be performed provided that a resistance permitting multiple reps is used. Isometric contractions and motionless standing should be avoided. And just note that that's found somewhere else in the book, somewhere else in this class in a quiz. They also have an entire list of other things that you can pause and look at or kind of review over here to the right. All of which I have to say I like a lot of these in terms of just being smart, like in terms like hydration, proper footwear, use good equipment, etc. And they list some other more esoteric things that might have like some potential for trauma, etc., which I think are also pretty good. But just realize that when you look at these guidelines, that you'll have guidelines, and you'll also have guidelines for individuals who perhaps are working out before they were pregnant and people who started working out after they got pregnant. But in general, this is a pretty good list that you can draw from to help guide and direct your clients. Next, contraindications for exercise during pregnancy. On the left-hand side here, you have absolute contraindications. Let me get myself out of the way. And these are just ones you want to make yourself aware of, because you might have a client who comes in who mentions these things to the left, and it might be an absolute contraindication to their exercise, and you might need to guide them to go source a doctor to obtain notification or note if they're okay to actually work out. Relative contraindications a little bit different here in terms of what you can and can't do with the client, but just kind of make yourself acquainted with the list of absolute and relative contraindications, and have a better understanding of, if you see somebody and you work with them and they come in and they talk about having uncontrolled or poorly controlled hypertension while they're pregnant, you need to send them to their doctor, right? Malnutrition or extreme underweight at the time while they're pregnant, maybe they're anorexic as well, you might need to have a conversation with them and then recommend that they go to their doctor, and they might be able to continue to train with you. But realize if you're over any absolute contraindications, send them to the doctor. All right, guys, I'm going to end it right there. And with that, we covered a couple different topics here in this chapter, kind of broad-based or specialized populations. We'll get into more as we go deeper into the book, but these are the main three that you're going to come across: adolescent, elderly, and pregnant populations. All right, guys, thank you so much.